Okay, so the lesson objective today, students will graph functions and relations using XY tables and function notation. So we talked about this a little bit on Friday. Function notation basically says you use f of x instead of y. And the way it's said is f of x. So for example 1, for f of x equal to 3x plus 1, we're going to find f of x when x is equal to 2. And when x is equal to negative 3. So all that means is we're just plugging in those values for x in the expression 3x plus 1. So if I want to know f of 2, basically what is the value of the function when x equals 2, I just put in a 2 for x. So 3 times 2 is 6. And then when you add 6 plus 1, you get 7. So f of 2 would be equal to 7. If I want to know what it is when x is negative 3, do the same thing. Plug in the negative 3. 3 times negative 3 plus 1, so that's negative 9 plus 1. That equals negative 8. And so f of negative 3 would be negative 8. So we're just plugging in values for x. So when it gives you a problem like that, you're not going to have to get f alone or anything like that. You just leave that number in the parentheses, f of 2 or f of negative 3 or f of whatever it is, okay? All right, so the first one we're going to graph is f of x is equal to 1/3 x plus 2. So that's why I gave you guys graph paper, so that you could draw graphs on your graph paper and have it nice and neat. So one of the things I notice is I've got a fraction there. I'm going to be multiplying x times 1/3. So if I want my table to come out without fractions, what kind of numbers would I have to multiply it by so that there's no more fraction? Like 1/3 times what is going to not have fractions? Alan? 3/1 could be one of them, but what's another number besides 3? Go ahead, Austin. 9's another one, right? So 3, 6, 9, aren't those all multiples of 3? Yeah, so what I want to do is I'm going to choose multiples of 3 to make my table. And that way it's going to be easier to graph. So instead of saying negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2, I do want to still use negative numbers. But this time I'm going to use negative 6, negative 3, 0, 3, and positive 6. And that way when I make my table, I'm going to end up with whole numbers. It's going to be easier to graph. So if I plug in the negative 6, I've got 1/3 times negative 6 plus 2. 1/3 of negative 6 is negative 2. So negative 2 plus 2, I end up with 0. I plot that point. Negative 6, 0. Then I move on to the next one. 1/3 times negative 3 plus 2. What's 1/3 times negative 3? Negative 1, right? Negative 1 plus 2, and so that equals 1. So I get a 1. So negative 3, positive 1 is my next point in my line. If I plug in 0, that's pretty easy. I just get 0 plus 2. So what's that equal? 2. All right. Plug in a 3. 1/3 of 3 is just 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. So I've got 0, 2, and 3, 3. Okay, and since this only has an x, I expect this to be a line. This is a linear graph. It should be coming out as a line because I just have an x. I don't have an x squared or anything like that. You have a question? Well, right now we're going to be doing with the table. We're going to be learning another way to do lines later on. Yes, but right now we're just doing it with the tables. Okay? All right, and then finally for 6, we've got 1/3 of 6 plus 2. So that's 2 plus 2, or 4. Yes? If it's a line and you see the pattern, it should follow that pattern. It's a good idea to just make sure though, but if it's not following the pattern, then check your work to see what happened. Maybe you messed up a negative or something. But yes, it should be following a pattern on the right side. Yeah. Okay, so then we just draw your line through the points. Okay, so let's talk about the domain and the range for this one. Is there any limit left to right? How wide that line's going to get? How far it's going to go to the left or the right? Is there a limit on it? What do you guys think? No, it's the arrow means it's going infinitely. So we can use all real numbers for the domain. What about up and down? Is there any limit on it? No, it also is all real numbers for the range. Okay? All right, so on your whiteboards, I'm going to have you guys do one. Okay, so what values would you use to graph f of x is equal to 1/4 x plus 1? So before you fill in your values, go ahead and show me what values you would plug in for x. Okay, fill in the left-hand side of your xy or f of x table. Show me what you're going to put on the left-hand side. Okay, multiples of what number? Multiples of 4, right? That way we don't end up with the fraction. So we have -8, -4, 0, 4, and 8. All right, plug those in and see what you get. Plug those in and fill in the other side of the table. All right, so when you plugged in those values, you should have gotten -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. So -8, -1, -4, 0, 0, 1, 4, 2, and 8, 3. So your line should have looked something like that. All right, back to your notes. Now we're going to do f of x is equal to the absolute value of x minus 3. And on Friday we mentioned that an absolute value graph should either be a V going up or a V going down. Okay, so you want to look at what's inside the absolute value bars, and you want to ask yourself, what will make that equal to 0? Yes, a positive 3. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to use that for my middle number in my chart. We're going to use that for the middle number. So I've got f of x. So I want 3 to be in the middle. So the numbers right before 3 are 1 and 2. The numbers right after 3 are 4 and 5. And so those are the values that I'm going to want to use. If you use -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2, what's going to happen is it's going to just look like a line. It's not going to look like a V. And so when you have an absolute value, if it's coming out like a line and it's not turning into a V, then you need to keep going till it turns into a V. You know it should be a V. Either that or check your signs to make sure you didn't mess something up. All right, so if I plug in a 1, I have the absolute value of 1 minus 3, which is the absolute value of -2, which equals 2. So 1, 2 would be my first point. Then I plug in a 2, so the absolute value of 2 minus 3, which is an absolute value of -1, which comes out to +1. So 2, 1 would be your next point. put in a 3. We already said that was going to be 0, right? So that's 3, 0. All right, then when I put in a 4, I get the absolute value of 1, which is just 1. And so we're back to 1 again. What do you guys think the last one's going to be? What would the pattern look like? It went 2, 1, 0, then it started counting back up, right? So what do we expect it to be? We expect it to be a positive 2, right? Let's make sure. Okay, so we put in 5 minus 3. What's the absolute value of positive 2? It's just positive 2. Okay, absolute value does not make it the opposite sign. It makes it positive, no matter what. So the absolute value of a positive number is not negative. The absolute value of a positive number is positive. The absolute value of a negative number is positive. All right, so then when you graph it, the graph looks like that. Okay, is there a limit left to right in the x direction, how wide or how narrow it's going to get? Is it going infinitely left to right? Yes, it is. So it's all real numbers for your domain. But if we look up and down, is y ever going to be down here in the negative numbers? No, it's going up both sides. So the lowest number y can possibly be is, what's the value of y? 0 right there, right? So y has to be greater than or equal to 0. And that would be your range. Okay, so an x squared graph. When you have an x squared graph, it's going to be kind of like a pointy U, either going up or down. And the other thing you want to remember is we don't have parentheses around that x, do we? So that means it's like I'm taking a negative 1 out in front and multiplying that times x squared. So you want to be careful when you make your table. Okay, so for this one, there's no x minus 1 or x plus 1 or anything. We're going to go ahead and use negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so you guys fill in that table. Show me on your, go ahead and fill it in on your notes, but then write it on your whiteboards to show me what you got for the values for f of x. Okay, so what you get is you end up with negative 4, negative 1, 0, negative 1, negative 4. Okay, and when you graph it, you should have an upside down U. We'll finish this off tomorrow. Thank you.